So it's my great pleasure to introduce a new format on IWI. And for those who are seeing this clip on Silicon Curtain, you may not be aware that we've produced a new channel. It's designed to tackle Russian weaponized information and all its different formats and manifestations. It's a creator community. So you'll see not just sort of this strand we're going to create, but you'll see many other creators whose purpose it is to debunk and tackle weaponized Russian information. In fact, not just Russian, but any kind of authoritarian manipulation and information. This stream, tentatively, we're going to call it an emotional Ukrainian because so many Ukrainians, especially women, seem to get labeled that way in academia and the media as a way, I think, of diminishing their agency, diminishing the impact of their views. And I have to say, more often than not, their views are far more sound, far more robust, far more rational than many so-called experts who are non-Ukrainian. Well, let's jump into this. I'm delighted to introduce you to Lesia Dubenko, who is going to be leading this strand. And yes, the very epitome of an emotional Ukrainian. But I'll ask you to introduce yourself, your work, so the audience is familiar with that. And then we're going to dive into what hopefully will be a far more conversational, slightly irreverent format, which looks at the week's news.
So thank you for having me, and thank you for saying that I epitomize that. I'm very flattered. I'm very flattered, and that's good. So a little bit about myself. I'm a journalist and analyst. I've been featured in the Financial Times, Political Europe, the Washington Times, many outlets. I also authored quite a few analytical reports, privately and publicly. But most of the time, what I do is I basically run my social media handles. I have my Substack, so you're free to subscribe if you want. And generally, right now, I'm focused on Ukraine and Russia and Ukraine winning, or at least Ukraine getting a good deal. That's also something that I'm interested in. And yeah, so I studied in Sweden. I have a degree in European affairs, and here I am.
One of the big topics we're going to look at this week is, of course, Mr. Carlson going to Moscow once again. But let's start actually with a bigger concept of perhaps why he's been sort of called back to, the source of this propagandistic method, which he clearly admires so much. And that seems to be that a whole range of sort of foreign policy dominoes are tumbling. Russia obviously has pinned a lot of its foreign policy success on Syria and supporting the Assad regime, using that as a kind of springboard, and the port of Tartus and various other facilities as a springboard for its influence in the Middle East and indeed around the world. That's crumbling. They tried to overturn the Moldova election. That hasn't worked. They've tried to manipulate the Romanian election, and it now seems that that is going off the rails as well. And of course, we have Georgia Dream looking, I won't say fragile at this point, but certainly they haven't had an outright win in Georgia. Why and how is this all going so wrong for Putin?
Well, let's start with Carlson. And I think the reason why he's summoned is because the first interview wasn't bad enough. It wasn't embarrassing enough, so he was summoned for the second time. And it seems to me, I haven't watched the one with Lavrov, but I would assume that Lavrov is more well spoken. At least he's a diplomat, even though he's a very aggressive diplomat. But at least he's well spoken compared to Putin, who was just I don't even know what that was. I mean, all the jokes and memes after. I'm sure you remember Austin Powers and that monologue about Boulanger father and everything is like a penchant for buggery, and it was exactly the kind of monologue that we saw. And I think one of the reasons also why he was summoned is because that interview, in my opinion, despite Russian propaganda claiming it was a success, it wasn't a success. I even among the far right people, maybe a few were impressed, but ultimately it looked like you're dealing with a complete idiot, in the sense a complete idiot that that you can't really take seriously. Because when a person answers this way and starts to talk about historical things which are completely unrelated, then there's something wrong in his head, right? There's a lot of things wrong in his head. So I think that's one of the reasons. And also, as you rightly pointed out, what's happening worldwide is both good news for Putin and not so good news for Putin, because the Syria kind of scenario, I don't know whether they saw it coming. I don't sit in the Kremlin, but I would just generally assume that, knowing the situation in the Middle East and how it's unfolding, that they might have expected something like that. To this degree or not, I'm not sure. And again, I don't know exactly how it happened, the rebels, attacking. But again, I would assume, this is just an assumption, is that it probably has something to do with Israel. So somebody helped, yeah, somebody helped there, because it was just way too good. Like beeper operation good. So it just feels that way. I mean, obviously I
Well, in
don't have.
Turkey, I mean, Turkey's been fingered potentially because
Yeah.
what we're seeing is an extraordinary, not just a sort of unfolding of a strategic plan. This isn't just sort of, you don't just randomly start taking this much territory. I mean, Russia has lost hundreds of thousands of troops to take less territory in Donbass over the last 12 months. So this doesn't happen by accident. And you also, from what I can tell, you've already got a proto police force, rolled out in Aleppo. So clearly there's a lot of thought and planning that's gone into this, not just sort of, training in certain military techniques, but in the follow-up of how you sort of impose some kind of order. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, that scale of planning should be noticed. I wonder whether, the US were keeping an eye on that. I wonder whether this has completely passed the Russians by. I mean, maybe they thought just by like bombing hospitals, that would
Well,
be
it's their
enough.
favorite thing to do. So, I mean, it's when it comes to military strategy, it's the hospitals that matter the most. But it's also actually strategy. It's part of intimidating your adversary, right? Your enemy, which makes sense from their perspective, obviously. But what I'm trying to say here is that, like you rightly noted, that there's a lot of planning going on. And I don't believe in coincidences, especially in the Middle East, where there are so many conflicted interests and everybody's helping. Like today, Turkey and Israel are at odds, tomorrow they're friends, and so on. It's just like there's no way. And plus, I talked to some Israeli politicians, and they were super angry about Russia. So I wouldn't be surprised. But again, this is not like something, this is just a hypothesis, but I believe that it's not completely unfounded. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that Russian military power, I still don't understand what exactly that is. So when we talk about it and worldwide, what the hell is it? Private groups like Wagner? I mean, okay, are they that good? Probably not. We've already seen that in Mali, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
evidence shows they're not good at all.
They're
They're good
not good at
against
all.
civilians and unarmed people. Wagner, they use terror tactics, absolutely terror, intimidation, and so on. They use extreme violence. They're quite happy to partner up with the worst of the worst people wherever they operate. So, they'll advance into a vacuum through the use of terror, criminality, and of course manipulation of media, because in speaking to a former BBC correspondent for Sahel, it does seem that also in that region there is a huge investment in radio propaganda, in local newspapers, local networks, social media. So they create this aura of invincibility. They create the illusion on the one hand that they're there to help and it's a positive, but on the same time, that message is delivered with an implicit threat that, right, even if the reality you're experiencing doesn't really ladder up to the idea we're improving your lives, and this is what we'll do to you. So you've got the sort of carrot and stick all, merged together in this nasty little propagandistic package. And the sweetness, the way this bitter pill is sold to people is by saying, well, at least we're not the West, at least we're not the colonialists, while they busy go around ravaging, raping, killing, torturing, and extracting the mineral resources and wealth of the country they operate in, which is the very definition of the most rapacious kind of imperialism. That's the impression I get. But this only works if you're not resisted by someone, it seems, who is half competent.
You rightly noted that when it comes to propaganda, they do a lot and they're good at it. In fact, this made me recall a line I rewatched recently, The Spy with Sacha Baron Cohen, right? About Ellie Cohen. And there was this, so when he goes to Damascus, pretending to be the Syrian guy, I forgot his name, right? And he makes friends with the local whatever well, nephew of some general, and they talk about military affairs and all about like Syrian successes and so on. And he says, if only we were as good on the battlefield as on the radio, right? So this is exactly what more or less Russia is. It's very good when it comes to propaganda. Now that it mastered, if that's a military, like if that's a weapon, for sure, they're good at it. They're good at it because they use a lot of different, yet very simple, but different conflicted messages that cater to every audience. And, they know exactly what you want to hear and they produce a message accordingly. So this is why they're so good at it. And this is probably their only like true military power, because outside of it, if you look at the weapons that they have and everything and missiles, and it's like, okay, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like I'm right, because you just look at all these things. These are very simplistic kind of technology. It's simple technology, it's simple, Soviet simple technology. It can be effective, it can be not so effective. It's destructive for sure, but it doesn't mean that it's like super effective. It's high precision weapon of some sort, Iron Dome. It's not Iron Dome. It's like you literally just fire like whatever. Okay, if you manage to down something, great. If not, then propaganda will fix it for you. But what I'm trying to say is that really I don't understand why people are so focused on this kind of Russian military power, especially abroad. It crumbles all the time. So if you take the Hamas attack also, which was definitely 100%, okay, 99.99999%, it was facilitated by Russia and Iran. So if you look at it, how did it work out? How did it work out? It worked out badly. I mean, Gaza is destroyed. Hamas at some point will be destroyed fully too. So if that was your goal, okay, well you did very well. I mean, what's the deal? The same with Hezbollah. So taking out all the leadership of Hezbollah, that's probably wasn't really their plan. I'm not so like 100% sure that they wanted Israel to kill every Hezbollah general or so. So
Well, it's a lack of imagination, isn't it? I mean, let's face it, none of us saw it coming that beepers would be able to take out, almost all their leading, activists and figures. I guess no one quite saw that coming. But I find that absolutely fascinating. It's the difference between strategic planning, the willingness to exert force, the willingness to defend the values you stand for. And this isn't me judging the right or wrong of the scenario, but it's Israel saying these are our interests and we are not going to pull our punches in defending them. But also there's a huge amount of strategic planning that goes on there. And this seems to me something the Russians do not do. I mean, you and I know why they don't do that. The level of trust in society is low. The sense of exceptionalism, the sense of unique entitlement that Russian culture has means that, well, if you have that, well, why do you need to strategically plan? I mean, I think the whole society is not geared to long-term strategic planning and cooperation. But Israel clearly is. Now, they could have set those beepers off at any time. They may never have set them off if the circumstances didn't arise. But the idea that you sort of create that capability and you have a level of tolerance for, Hezbollah BS and the rockets coming over, and you put up with that maybe for a couple of years, like you haven't reached the critical threshold where that network is suddenly going to become necessary. But the level of planning is unbelievable that goes into that. We don't see anything like that from the Russian side, but they're very good at expanding into a
I'm sorry, I'm
vacuum, you
just
know.
gonna butt in. I'm just you'll never see anything like that because this is not how the Slavic mentality works. So Slavs do not plan long term. This is out of the question. Okay, it has to be like, you know, it's most of the times it looks pretty much like this. You get drunk, wake up drunk, and that's when you make the decision. And it's these hangover decisions when you get super angry and you start doing something. And it's never about long-term planning because long-term planning requires you to have certain well characteristics, right, to do that, and it's just not what the Slavs do. And you know, so it's never gonna happen. So it's something China can do, yeah, that for sure. That's something in their kind of like, you know, it corresponds to their mindset, but definitely not the Russians. And I would actually sorry to
I'll
say
argue there is something they do
Ukrainians are not
invest
that
in.
good at that either. So
But there is something, again, coming back to information. There is one area where they do invest long term because you can see a consistent line from, I mean, let's not go to the Tsarist period, but let's start at least in 1920s. There's a consistent investment in, I would call it, coercive manipulation or coercive control. And that is consistent. And it's very, very simple. It's building the idea that Russia cannot be beaten, uh, that Russia is a superpower, that Russia is exceptional, and it should be feared. So I think they are prepared to invest long term, because that's such a simple idea. It doesn't matter how complex the mechanic is that you use to invest in it. The idea is kind of so simple and requires a very low threshold of trust within Russian society. They can all still get behind that form of propaganda. But that seems to me, they've spent many, many decades in investing in that kind of persona as a state.
yeah, but it's not really about long-term planning. It's just they saw that it was effective. So and I don't think that it's about like long term. They see it's effective, they invest. They find new ways. They definitely analyze audiences. So when it comes to communication and so on, they do a better job than the West and a lot of governments because a lot of their messages are very emotional to begin with, right? None of their messages are facts. So these are emotions, pure emotions, and they cater to each group, which is to satisfy. This is why, like, you know, I brought this up during our previous interviews and so on. But when you see a problem in the West, and even if you find some Russian connections, I really discourage you from saying that this is Russian propaganda. This was Russia who organized this specific thing in the West, because what they do is a little bit different. So I think that this is what they cracked, the match in the matrix they cracked was that they see a problem, a real problem, you know, like farmers in Poland who are dissatisfied. They are dissatisfied for a reason, and for their whether they're right or not doesn't matter. It's like it's a group that lives in Poland and is entitled to be dissatisfied for some reason. So they see that such sentiments exist, and then they start amplifying them. They amplify. And how do you decouple the reality of the problem from Russia's influence, from Russia amplifying it? So if you label it as Russian propaganda, that's going to be wrong because that means you are diminishing the problem that it actually exists and you don't want to address it. The very same thing that happened with uncontrolled immigration and so on and so on. It's like there's so many problems out there that Russia amplified, and you know, and these problems were later labeled as Russian propaganda, which is completely untrue.
Mm. And it's
It's
an
not.
interesting distinction,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because we, in our partisan differences, we fall into this very easily. So take the figure of someone like Tulsi Gabbard. Now,
Yeah.
immediately, people will see her repeating Russian narratives and they will say she's a Russian asset or agent. That then triggers people on, that side of the aisle, to say this is clearly a false label. Uh, and then everyone's kind of fighting and shouting or whatever. But there's a unit cost of investment, isn't there? If you're going to actually have an agent, that's pretty expensive to invest in an agent, to build an agent up, to service an agent, to keep the secrecy around an agent. But if you can get somebody of an influential position to repeat your disinformation, so that what they're actually pronouncing is misinformation, the unit cost of achieving that is much lower. And then you can create the illusion that you've got an asset or agent at a fraction of the cost. But I think because we're not clear on the mechanics of when disinformation turns into misinformation as opposed to malinformation, and then actual spycraft, we just fall into this trap. And then it works. It's a win-win for Russia because everyone's fighting. It doesn't matter. They've achieved the divide and conquer, which is what that was intended.
Yeah, and this is what I'm gonna add. So what you're saying, there's this a Swedish defense expert on Russia. I forgot his surname. His name is Oscar Johansson or something like that. I'll look him up. So he brought this up, what you're saying, several years ago, saying that Russian propaganda is extremely cost effective precisely for that reason, because to sort of breed an agent, let's call it that way, that's a lot of time, and obviously they get caught at some point. It's a nasty business. And you have this Tulsi Gabbard, because obviously the first time when I heard about it, because I didn't know anything about her, so when I first found out that she was like saying all these things on Twitter about NATO and stuff, I was like, okay, this is not good at all. But then I talked to several people, also Fred Hoffman, perhaps you know him, and he said that, yeah, the risk is there, but it seems like she is also like, she was, she's lieutenant colonel or something like that, so she has a rank, some military rank. She is not completely helpless, lost like Matt Gates, but thank God that dude is out. That one is a serious problem, because I don't think that Tulsi inside, she doesn't come across as a person who's bad, who's malign, unlike Matt. Matt is just, oh my God, poster boy of everything bad. You
As
can't
I
read
saw her
her.
on Twitter, it was like you're safer in any bathroom with all the trans people in the world, but are you safe with Trump's cabinet picks? I mean, so many of them have
Well,
rather dodgy accusations
that's
against
a
them.
good one. That's a good one. I appreciate that. But it depends. With Matt, I would say no. The answer is no. You can chill together with Tulsi, I guess, but not with Matt.
Don't go into that unisex bathroom.
Yeah,
Definitely
and
not.
and he said, Mr. Hoffman said that, yeah, Tulsi is like that a little bit, but it also depends on who she listens to, so who is around her. So that's why I'm not extremely optimistic or happy, but by Trump's standard, I think the foreign policy picks that he has are good. This is not Tucker Carlson, who was slated to become state secretary. Oh, that would be like a total disaster.
Yeah.
But Marco Rubio is a completely sane person. I don't have anything against him at all. I think he's a very good pick.
And
And
Keith Kellogg is quite an interesting character, actually. Some of the things he said are rather, yeah, I mean, they are rather interesting to see how that
I
unfolds.
think, yeah, I think that, we shouldn't expect a lot from them, but these people clearly know what they're talking about. So this is not some random Cash Patel, Jackson Hinkle, Tucker Carlson get together. And it's not that at all. And
Yeah,
I
if you're
think
going to
a
get
lot
Jackson Hinkle as Secretary of Defense, I think that's the point at which everyone starts to
Yeah,
debate
well,
seriously,
Jackson,
right?
yeah, when you see that Jackson Hinkle is dissatisfied about something, that's like, wow, that's music to your ears. Because he had a fight not that long ago with other MAGA, like hardcore MAGA, because some MAGA are sane, and then you have like the completely lost, so to speak, group. Nick Fuentes, something like that, yeah. They had a fight, and it was lovely. I read every tweet. I was like, "Go on, please don't stop." And it was so bad. The offenses were so bad. I was like, I have a lot to learn from these guys, and even though I'm offending them almost on a daily basis, but what I'm trying to say here is that I don't expect a lot from the cabinet, but I think by Trump's standards, it's not bad. And again, I don't know, all this ceasefire talk. Yeah, I think that there will be like a push of some sort for sure, because he promised it, and he can't just say that I'm not going to do it at all. That I don't believe in. But I think that during that negotiations, some new things may arise which will alter the course. I'm not 100% sure, but I can't really see Keith Kellogg saying that, yeah, we're gonna like make this super bad deal, because he understands the situation on the ground. He traveled to Ukraine just to make the case closed. That I also don't really see happening. So I'm just a little bit optimistic, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna say that it's gonna be super great. Either way, for the time being, I just don't know what the alternative is, because even if Kamala Harris were to win, she would do absolutely the same. And you know what's going on the front. It's a catastrophe.
Well,
And
Afghanistan is a great
yeah.
example as well, isn't it? Withdrawal from Afghanistan. And that kind of leads to an interesting question because, in my mind, I assume that a failure such as Afghanistan, that provided a lot of points to the other side. And I think that may well have degraded Biden's perception of his competency. That may have contributed to his election loss, although there are many things there. And of course, it wasn't directly him, but Kamala Harris was clearly associated with that team. But I wonder whether foreign policy actually has such an influence. And then if we turn to the collapse in Syria of Russia's presence, the Z Patriots, I mean, I don't really read them directly because there aren't enough hours in the day and it's fairly nasty stuff, but I do consume a lot of media that will interpret what the Z Patriot our community are saying. My favorite strand being Z Nityo. But they're going out of their minds about the loss of Syria, out of their minds. And of course, they can't criticize Putin directly, but it does seem that, I won't say private conversations, but privately, almost certainly they're gonna be seeing that as a massive failure of policy right at the top. But of course, it's not a democratic society, and what the government doesn't represent the democratic will. It'll take soundings of what people are feeling, but will that change anything? Will these foreign policy dominoes falling have any impact on Putin's position within Russia at all?
Look, I don't think that they will have a profound impact. I don't think so. As you rightly said, Zet Nityo, which loosely translates as Zet whining.
Whining, is it? Yes,
Yeah,
whinging and
whining.
whining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whining is a normal state of mind in Russia. So if you are not whining, then something's wrong. So I wouldn't, I wouldn't really use that as an example of somebody being so dissatisfied that tomorrow they're going to topple Putin. I don't think so. No, they're going to whine and whine and whine. Then they will have their shot of vodka and go back to business as usual. So this is more or less what they do. This is obviously a very simplified way of putting it, but it is like that. It is like that. So you whine and you're dissatisfied, and actually you take there's a certain when it comes to Slavic mentality, whining is a way actually to have fun. A strange way, but it is. You get a kick out of it. You get like also upset and so on. This is how you generate an emotion within you. And I don't really think that, like I said, that this will lead to any like very bad consequences for Putin, because I see a lot of people already making predictions on YouTube. Tomorrow he's gonna collapse this. Guys, please give me a break. And I don't think that the regime will collapse, or that even the way ruble is behaving, so to speak, right now, that it will impact the society so much, because the Russian society at the moment is so kind of suppressed mentally in every way that it doesn't matter anymore. Perhaps if they ban all alcohol in the country, then something happens, yeah. But otherwise, I don't really expect anything to happen because this basically, you must understand that 80% or so of Russia, 70%, they live in poverty, and they've always lived in poverty. Like, it's not something that happened yesterday. And everyone else, they're doing fine, you know? I check occasionally what Russian stars are up to, celebrities. They're fine. They have their like
They're all peachy,
restaurants.
aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, they have their restaurants. They have their Dolce Gabbanas. It's all good. They have this. They have new cars. They have new phones. They're fine. So I'm sorry,
Mm.
I don't think that Russia will collapse anywhere soon. But what I'm trying to say here is that um the way basically well, still obviously all those failures, they impact something in Russia. And that's the understanding that they're actually not a superpower, because they can like keep saying that they are, but they know that they're not when they see this. Yeah,
I mean,
like
this is why I think people have to understand who the most popular figures in Russian history are and who the least popular are. You know, when you have these kind of polls or surveys, it's a bit more, to our mind, predictable, say, in the West. You know, you'll always get Churchill in there and you'll have other figures. You'll have maybe Oliver Cromwell, but it'll be discussed in a kind of like, yeah, he did some really bad things. And, you know, you'll have a slightly, hopefully more rational debate about it. But what people don't understand is if you were to have a poll in Russia of who the worst and best leaders of all time have been, Joseph Stalin, number one, now, without question, you
yeah,
know. And it's not like, ah, he did some bad stuff. It's like, right, he conquered half of Europe. That's, yeah, we like that. Who's the worst time leader? Gorbachev. Why? One, he lost an empire. Two, he tried to persuade people to stop drinking,
that's
to,
awful.
you know, to fall into this well of whining and whinging, which is the only way you can survive when you have no empathy and no agency. So I think that's important. Russians generally, not all of them, but most of them loathe Gorbachev and they judge him. Why? Not because there weren't stuff in the shops and so on. He lost an empire and he tried to stop them drinking.
That's true. And also it's just like, in the 1990s when this whole thing collapsed, obviously I don't remember much about those years, but still. When the 1990s happened, it was, even if you look at the way that decade was portrayed on screen, there's plenty of like, material that you can watch, like all these criminal dramas and stuff. It was like when basically there were like, characters who would keep asking, when will this hell stop? When will we go back to the way it was? Because yes, some people benefited, some became oligarchs, some embezzled, because like Soviet Union or not, but it was public still. All the enterprises and stuff, they didn't belong to somebody. And then the Soviet Union collapsed, and suddenly you have people like Berezovsky, like late one. These are not good people, and they pretended to be Democrats, but they were also like shit, you know. And then you have Putin, who seemed to be this new leader at the time. I don't know how old he was, 45, 50, something like that. Yeah, probably about around 45. With this fresh new face, well spoken, says good things. Why not? So actually,
And he
there's a
spoke with an ethnic
video.
Russian accent. Let's face it.
Oh,
I mean, so many Russian leaders in the Soviet era had, I would say not the sort of St. Petersburg kind of
oh yeah,
dialect,
yeah. Actually,
so
with his
regional
accent,
accents. And
yeah, Stalin, he was from Georgia, so he spoke in this funny accent. Okay. And then you have Khrushchev, who was this very kind of simple guy, and he was like closer to the Ukrainian version of Russian. And
it's
well,
like in England, it'd be a bit like someone with a broad West Country accent,
yeah,
And
Yeah.
it's just almost unimaginable.
Hillbilly kind of
Yeah.
accent. I said this is what he was. Brezhnev, he just sounded like this all the time. Then you have the Chernenko and the other one,
And
forgot.
even Gorbachev had a little bit of an
Yeah, yeah,
accent, I
yeah.
believe,
Oh,
and
very
he'd
like very simple because those were simple people.
yeah.
Okay, they came from simple backgrounds. They were not some kind of like they were not born into some aristocratic kind of environment, Tsarist kind of environment. They actually were what you call, from the gutter.
Proletarians, weren't
Yeah,
they? Yeah.
from the gutters. So they were very simple. And then you have this well-spoken young man, this hidden gem that Yeltsin found somewhere in St. Petersburg. And he became their leader. And to this day, and or you take Medvedev. Okay, Medvedev these days he's drunk, he's like, he's an alcoholic, but he didn't used to be like that. If you take even right now, when you look at the way he writes, I don't know about speaking, I haven't heard him speak in a while, but when you look at the way he writes very well. This is a very educated person. Okay, so he may be a complete wacko at the moment, but he's a very educated person and he used to speak very well too. I actually when it comes to Medvedev, I have a little bit of sympathy for him just because he at least, stays the way he is. Like, he doesn't hide his nature. Yeah, he has a drinking problem. He says a lot of stuff, but he's not pretending that he didn't say that.
No, no.
Yeah,
One can almost say the same with Solovyov. I mean, absolutely toxic, poisonous, awful, unpleasant. Um, but he has a way with language. I mean, there's a certain cadence and a rhythm to how he speaks, and it might all be nonsense. It might be nasty, but he's certainly extremely well educated, and there's a theatricality about his performance, which, like Surkov, comes from, I would say, people who are very much grounded in a sort of classical Russian literary tradition, which is the sort of canon of Russian literature and theater. Obviously, they're using it to extremely nefarious ends, but you can't hide that fluency with which they communicate.
Well, Solovyov used to be this physics teacher, from what I remember. So, it's some private English kind of language school, right? So he is a very educated person too. And then you have Simonyan. She's not as educated, and she speaks like her Russian is, these pioneer kind of camps, right? This is how she speaks. This is the kind of language and vocabulary she uses is so obsolete and outdated in a way that I don't understand. She's like 40 something. Why do you speak like that? Are you still mentally in some pioneer camp? Kissing some boys behind something like behind some tree or something. It's super weird. But Solovyov, yeah, he's a very educated guy, and I think that it's money that's to blame foremost because he didn't used to be like that. He was a much more sane person, and actually there is a video, a famous one, where he says that no, we're in like Crimea, regarding Crimea, and I think he was honest there that you wouldn't take it by force because he looked honest. Because there's a very same video of Putin saying that no, we're not going to take Crimea, but then you can tell that he's lying the way he communicates it, even with his eyes. You can tell that he's lying. Whereas Solovyov, I think he actually believed that
Oh
this,
yeah, yeah. It seems
yeah,
very
that this was,
genuine, doesn't he? He says
yeah.
that it would be unthinkable that the use of force against Ukraine to take these strategic interests. He described it as being the end, the end of Russia. But yeah, fast forward 30 years and it's changed somewhat.
Money changed him.
Mm. Whereas
Italian
Tucker
villas.
Carlson, I mean, let's transition to Tucker Carlson because you go back and even when he was he on MSNBC or CNN, I think, even then there was an inauthenticity, I would say, about him. Again, someone who's very, I wouldn't say he's erudite at all, but someone who certainly has a fluency with words and understands how to manipulate people's expectations very well and weaponize information, certain concepts. But I suspect Carlson does not have the, I would say, that sort of literary and certainly not historical grounding in history that some of these Russian propagandists would have.
Oh, no, no. I think he is much more simple in his ways. He's a business guy. He's more of a business guy to me. And I think the only thing that puzzles me about Tucker Carlson, I still don't believe that he's an idiot. I look at him, I don't think that he's stupid. What is the incentive is completely unclear to me because he comes from a rich family. He's educated. He has a lot of money. What is it that you're missing? Is there something missing in his life? I just don't quite understand what. Because even if we were to say that, okay, Putin gives him money or the Kremlin funds him, okay, but why does he need that money in such amount? What's he after, you know? Is he like driving a new Lambo every month? What's the deal? Because to me this is not very clear. So he's clearly a capitalist guy. He's clearly like, he's clearly not stupid. So this is something that puzzles me, and I think this is actually I asked a few people about this, and they didn't produce an answer which was satisfying. I think that maybe it's a way to just compensate for some kind of very personal issues. Maybe somebody told him back in the day that he would never be the most popular person or something. Because if you look at who he interviews, it's always about, you know, publicity that's so negative in a way that just like that guy who purportedly had sex with Obama, like after some sex, oh sorry, after some drugs. Like, what? Where did you even find this guy? Why would you even do that? Maybe you get a kick out of interviewing such people. Maybe that's his deal also. You know, when you find some kind of very kind of marginal characters and you're like, yes, you're gonna be on the show. Nobody is like, nobody's gonna interview, but I will, because my name is Tucker Carlson and I want to ask you several questions. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense. He used to be this Fox News host, right? Even Fox News had enough of him, you know? So I really, really, really am curious. I would actually like to meet him someday.
I mean, he has a huge platform. One of those recent interviews he did is with someone he described as the greatest historian of the age, someone who turns out just to really be a kind of podcaster. I say just a
Huh.
podcaster because not all podcasters are created equal.
There's
I mean,
something that the
um,
Holocaust, no?
no, he did it. I think he did a podcast about Twitter or something. I mean, so he's a historian of some sort of modern political, sort of technological kind of subjects. Okay, maybe that was interesting, maybe it wasn't. But he did interview about how Churchill really was the bad guy in World War II
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Hitler's misunderstood. That got 33 million views. So yes, Carl Carson doesn't need the money necessarily, but
I think
33 million views translates into quite a lot of cash and even more influence and traction with a certain audience, and it fulfills a purpose. And I want to ask you, that purpose, to me at least, seems to align very, very closely with the purpose of Kremlin propaganda. So looking beyond the narratives, you've got this idea. What does Russian propaganda want you to do? Well, it wants you to be weak and divided. It wants you not to be able to put up any resistance to the extension of its influence, force, whatever it is. And how do they do that? They do that by trying to erode your agency, eroding your institutions. And they do that also by creating this sense that everything's not so simple, everything's ambiguous, nothing really matters. It's
it's
highly
deeper.
nihilistic. Yeah. Это все неоднозначно. And it seems that this is very much the sort of the popular end of how that manifests is occupied, the niche is occupied by Tucker Carlson. At the higher cultural end, it's occupied by Lex Friedman. But the result is the same. Life is confusing. There's no moral absolutes. Everything is like, everything's wishy-washy. So consume the information by all means, but don't take any action. Don't feel you have any, agency to change the world.
Well, on the subject of Lex Friedman, I don't really know much about him. So I saw a long time ago an interview that he did with Zuckerberg when these new glasses are out or something. he doesn't seem to me as such a bad guy. He might be, I just feel like the whole like because how old is he? I don't know. Okay, he belongs to the younger generation, and
He'll
I
be,
think
I
that a
guess,
lot of
late
them,
30s, early 40s, something like
yeah.
that, I would have
So
thought, yeah.
I would say generally that this kind of generation, uh, they are just what you're saying. Everything's not very not very clear and so on. I also think so in a way. I must be honest. So I'm not saying that this is like I'm also a relativist, but to some extent. Yes, there are things out there which you understand, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. But to say that I have a very, very rigid view of things, I don't. And I do sympathize in a way with, not so much with Tucker Carlson, but maybe with some of these, I would call them the crypto bros, this crypto crowd, because all these people, they grew up with this belief after the 2009 meltdown that there's something wrong, like very corrupt about the system in general. And I think they're entitled to that view. That's why Bitcoin was born and so on, because Bitcoin is not just Bitcoin, it's not just some kind of thing that today costs 3,000, tomorrow 100,000. It's a huge ideology of its own that you can be like, you can be in control of your money, of your operations, that the Federal Reserve or the government isn't going to control that. So this is why it was created. So that's that crypto crowd, so to speak, and they're all pro-Trump because Trump is more like, aligned with this kind of view. It's also anti-establishment. It's not somebody from the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas, and so on. And they simply lost faith in their government. They just don't trust their government anymore. So they like people in their 20s and their 30s, they do not trust their governments. That's reserved for somebody older. And the ones who are younger, they're like, no, 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 no. And then obviously, a lot of times it turns out that they're right. Well, not a lot of times, but sometimes, they do. It turns out that this guy lied, this one lied, this one lied, and you think to yourself, okay, well, should I listen to a CNN host or Lex Friedman? Because both can twist facts for sure, but CNN will twist it in one way and Lex will twist it in another. The ultimate conclusion you can make out of all this is that you need to have critical thinking in the sense of you shouldn't be believing somebody just because they work for the BBC or CNN, but you shouldn't also be believing somebody on Twitter just because they are an independent podcaster. Okay,
And
so
I think it aligns as well with, that's, I wouldn't argue with you at all there, because there always has been and there always will be whether it's a market economy or a certain, there always will be pressures to, where power and influence are going to pool in certain areas, because that's just how humans work. But the trick, isn't it, is, well, what comes out of that? What are the mechanisms you use to tackle authoritarianism, an unhealthy centering of power and wealth and influence? And the traditional tools have been things like unions, institutions, the attempt at, I might say, objective media as possible, but an attempt to create more objective media. Party system, these are all mechanisms that can go the wrong way and can themselves become part of the problem, but they can also be part of the solution. But again, the generation you're talking about, they've lost the belief in parties as an efficacious way to tackle that. Unions, that's outside of the experience of most people. The media is lost interest. So what Russian propaganda taps into here is not something it's created,
yeah.
but it's like, okay, if we undermine the concept of institutions and then dial up some valid and invalid critiques of the system, you've got a perfect way to sow chaos in your adversary. I mean, that's why I make the argument that Friedman fits a part of the niche. Now, if it turns out, and history shows, that there's been no investment in building his media profile, and this is just his MO, then fine, I will apologize. But I think in all these cases, we've got to follow the money, because when you follow the money, if there is any investment by, shadowy influences, it almost always can find its way back to the Kremlin or agents and intermediaries on behalf of the Kremlin. Almost always.
Oh, no, you're right. But still, I would like to emphasize here that even if listen, so we're coming back to what I talked about earlier. So like I said, Russia amplifies problems. So Friedman might be more popular than I don't know a lot about him, but let's put it that way. So he might have become more popular because he once received some kind of money from somebody to boost his account. Did it necessarily come with the instructions of Lex Friedman having to say this and that and that? I don't know. That I'm not so sure. So the thing I'm trying to communicate here is that, to begin with, to fix what you're saying, I think the number one step is for the legacy media, for the classic media, the CNN, the BBC, and everything, to stop claiming that they're independent and not biased. So I think that this is the general trajectory of modern media, is that you need to abandon the idea that the media is not, is not biased. It is, and it's super biased. And I can tell you this in full face because I work for legacy media. So I mean, it's just, it hurts me personally when editors in chief or somebody else claim that we're going to provide you with the facts, of course, but you can provide facts in very different ways. There's so many tricks to do that, depending on what you want to convey, right? It's the very same way that the BBC is more sympathetic toward Hamas than it is toward the Israeli, Israel in general, or the CNN, covering everything about Trump's trial as opposed to whatever else is happening in the country. And I can go on forever. And this does not generate trust, because modern society needs to hear where you stand on certain issues. You can no longer pretend that, oh, I'm this excellent journalist, I'm going to go to this person and ask him a question, this person is like, and I'm going to be totally independent when communicating these messages. You will not be independent. And now it's much easier to kind of get caught, because back in the day there was no social media, no internet to do that. You only saw people on TV and they were stars, right? This is like the absolute star. And then someday you find out something like about that Jimmy Savile guy or something, that it was also a star, right? And then you find out things like that, and which further undermines your trust in all this, because how did this happen? Who covered it up, and so on. And now again, we have this PDD scandal, and before that, Epstein scandal. So many scandals. So what I'm trying to say here is that stop pretending that you have some kind of very higher moral ground and you know a lot, whereas the average Joe or average Jane knows nothing. They actually do know something, even if they're not super educated.
I was going to throw the name of Russell Brand in there as well, but this is an endless list. We could spend half an hour listing the
Yeah,
powerful
it's not about,
males who.
I'm just saying that, all these scandals, they happen and they undermine trust in general. And rather than saying that, oh no, we have nothing to do with that, you can actually acknowledge that maybe you did have something to do with that. And that's one thing. And second, it's also about the media style these days. So I try, when I write my articles, I try not to pretend that I'm being objective, because obviously I'm not. But then again, I think that the way forward is for every media outlet to disclose the bias they have officially, not for somebody to go through your articles, because trust me, I did that too. I once compared the coverage by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal of the 2020 election. It was hell on earth, okay? It was like, even news pieces produced by the New York Times were biased. So I understand you hate Trump. Your outlet hates Trump, your readers hate Trump, but then don't claim to be objective, okay? Because just write a line somewhere or disclose, we are a pro-democrat institution and this is what we stand for. You're either with us or you're not, or we can try to convince you to be with us, okay? So that's one way of tackling it. And just generally be nicer. And because, like, as you see, for example, Trump won. It wasn't just Trump who won. It was GOP winning everything, the Senate, the House of Representatives. It tells a lot about the current state of societies and how they react. Whether Russia helped or not is completely irrelevant, because this is like, you shouldn't be focusing on Russia. You should be focusing on the problem first, and then the way Russia may have amplified it. Okay, so when you decouple these, you will see that you need to address this and then you address this, and not the other way around. Okay, because you'll reach very wrong conclusions and it will go on forever. Russia will keep picking new problems all the time, amplifying, and you'll be like, yeah, but Russia did this. Yes, it did, but you're not doing anything about it, aren't you? So, like, you're not really fighting back. Even when it comes to military stuff, what stops NATO from, I don't know, Mark Rutte or somebody else, or this Admiral Rob Bauer, what does it stop him from taking a mic and saying that, like, you do one step, and this is what we're going to do in response. Okay, got it? It's this kind of language, very straightforward language. It's called cowardliness. That's what stops. Okay, so this is like, rather than focusing on what Russia does wrong, which is a lot, you also need to kind of focus on what you're doing wrong, and that will be a very good start, I believe, to tackle the problems.
I mean, this is a fantastic, I think, solution-oriented place to end this episode. There's a lot of other stuff to discuss. That's why we're going to make this into a weekly format. Next week, we're going to talk about the Russian economy, state of the Russian economy, what impact that might have. We're going to look at the process. Jake Sullivan's been given the order to give everything to Ukraine. Of course, there are doubts as to whether he wants to. There are doubts as to whether he can achieve it in the small window of time available. And goodness, there's going to be so much more happening in the world. It seems like things are accelerating exponentially. I'm sure there'll be plenty of other topics we can't even imagine that we'll be tackling next week. But for everyone joining us on this, the initial episode of this new format, I hope you enjoy it. I hope you give us some helpful comments into how we can improve it, and also what other topics you'd like to see us discuss in future episodes. Lesia, for now, thank you so much.
Thank you.